in a green and golden kingdom called Avondale, where the hills rolled gently like sleeping giants and the rivers ran cold and clear as melted glass, there lived a girl named Isolde. She was the only daughter of a widowed lord named Caspian, a quiet and thoughtful man who loved his daughter more than all his land and all his title combined. He used to say that when Isolde laughed, even the birds stopped to listen, because they wanted to hear how joy was supposed to sound. Isolde had grown up beside open windows and flower gardens, with her father's old books and a small tortoiseshell cat named Fig who followed her everywhere like a shadow with opinions. She was curious and kind, the sort of girl who stopped to move snails off the road after rain, and remembered the names of every servant in the house. But beyond all of that, beyond her warmth and her quick mind and her generous heart, there was something else about Isolde that people noticed the moment she walked into a room. She was breathtakingly beautiful, not in the cold and distant way of paintings, but in the living, radiant way of early morning light, the kind that touches everything it falls on and makes it glow. Her hair was deep auburn, catching fire in the sun. Her eyes were the color of a forest after rain, green and alive and full of something that could not quite be named. And her smile, when it came, which was often, made people feel, without knowing why, that something good was about to happen. Her father saw all of it. Her beauty, yes, but beneath it, the far more important things. He told her, every night before she slept, that her heart was her greatest treasure, that beauty was a candle in a window, but character was the house itself. Isolde believed him. She had no reason not to, but fathers, even the very best of them, cannot be everywhere at once. And trouble, as it always does in stories worth telling, was already on its way up the hill. Lord Caspian had known Lady Marveth for many years. She was the widow of a neighboring landowner, and a woman of considerable appearance and considerable talent for saying exactly what people wanted to hear. She had two daughters of her own, Rosalind and Cynthia, both tall and well-dressed and trained from birth to present themselves like gifts wrapped in perfect paper. Lady Marveth was charming at dinner and gracious at church and utterly impossible to argue with in public, because she was always so very reasonable about everything. What Lord Caspian did not see, because kind men often cannot see it, was the way Lady Marveth looked at Isolde during their first meeting. She smiled warmly. She said all the right things. But her eyes did not smile. Her eyes measured. They moved over Isolde the way a merchant's eyes move over a rival's goods. Calculating the value, calculating the threat, calculating what would need to be done. Lord Caspian, growing older and lonelier with each passing season, married Lady Marveth in the autumn of Isolde's 15th year. The wedding was lovely. The flowers were perfect. And Isolde, who chose always to give people the benefit of the doubt, welcomed her new stepmother with open arms and a genuinely offered smile. Lady Marveth smiled back. And if the smile was the shape of warmth without the warmth inside it, Isolde did not yet know how to read that. She was 15, and she still believed that most people, given time, revealed their best selves. She would learn otherwise, but not right away. Not yet. For the first year, things were merely cool. Lady Marveth was never cruel in the obvious way. She did not shout or strike or forbid. She was far too clever for that. Instead, she was simply cold, in the way a house is cold when all the fires are let go out one by one. She redirected the servants' attention to her daughters. She removed Isolde quietly from the table's head to its side. She gave Rosalind the bedroom with the southern light and Cynthia the room with the garden view, and moved Isolde to the small chamber at the back of the house without explanation, as if it were a perfectly ordinary rearrangement. Lord Caspian, deep in his books and his gentle worries about the estate, noticed none of it. Or perhaps he noticed, and told himself it was the natural adjustment of a newly blended household. It is a sad truth that even good people sometimes choose not to look at what they are not ready to see. It was in the early spring of the year Isolde turned 17 that the royal proclamation arrived, and with it, everything that had been building quietly in the house of Lord Caspian broke open like a storm that had been gathering for a long time behind calm skies. The proclamation came by royal courier, sealed with the golden crest of the House of Aldenmore, and it was read aloud in the village square on a bright Tuesday morning. The King and Queen of Aldenmore, it announced, were hosting the grand festival of the Rose Moon, a celebration that would last 3 nights. held at the great palace on the hill above the capital city. And there, on the final night, their only son, Prince Dorian, who was 20 years old and reportedly as honest as he was handsome, would meet the young women of the kingdom and seek, among them, the one he hoped to make his queen. Every household with a daughter buzzed and fluttered at the news. There were fittings for new dresses, arguments over hair arrangements, and a sudden great demand for rose water and fine silk ribbon at every market stall in every village from one end of Avondale to the other. In the house of Lord Caspian, Lady Marveth heard the announcement, set down her teacup on its saucer with a precise and deliberate click, and began to plan. She did not announce her plans. She did not consult anyone. She simply began, the way a chess player moves pieces on a board without explaining strategy, trusting that everyone else is too far behind to understand until it is already done. She ordered new gowns for Rosalind and Cynthia. She hired a woman from the capital to come and teach them the formal dances of the court. She arranged for their hair to be styled in the fashion of the palace ladies. She rehearsed their introductions with them every evening after supper, correcting the angle of their chins and the placement of their hands, until both young women could curtsy with a precision that would have satisfied a military general. And Isolde sewed her own dress quietly in the evenings by candlelight, a simple thing of pale blue that she had cut from an old length of fabric her mother had left behind. It was not grand, but it was carefully made and it was hers, and she stitched a small border of white flowers along the hem, because white flowers had been her mother's favorite thing. She did not ask for much. She only asked to go. She only wanted to see the lights of the palace and hear the music and perhaps, if she was very lucky, to dance once on that famous floor she had read about in her father's books. She was 17. She wanted one evening of something extraordinary. That was all. She did not know, could not have known, that Lady Marveth had already seen the dress, had already seen Isolde hold it up to herself in the small mirror on the back of the washroom door, seen the way even that plain pale fabric seemed to turn to something luminous against her skin, and had made a decision that would seal the next chapter of Isolde's story before it had even properly begun. The morning of the festival's first night, Isolde rose early. She washed her face and braided her hair with the blue ribbon she had been saving for weeks. She dressed carefully, smoothed the skirt of her pale blue gown, and went to the mirror for one honest look at herself. She was not vain. Vanity had never taken root in her, perhaps because her father had always been far more impressed by what she said than by how she looked. But she was allowed, she thought, to be honest. And honestly, she looked lovely. The dress sat well on her shoulders. The braid was neat and soft. And her eyes, always her most striking feature, were bright with the particular light that comes from genuine excitement. She picked up her small bag, took a breath, and opened her bedroom door. She walked down the corridor toward the main hall, and that was when Lady Marveth appeared, seemingly from nowhere, as she had a talent for doing, standing in the passageway with her arms folded and her expression as composed as a painting of itself. Lady Marveth looked Isolde over from head to hem, looked at the pale blue dress, looked at the white flowers along the border, looked at the ribbon in the braid, and then she looked, for just a moment too long, at Isolde's face, at the brightness of it, at the kind of beauty that could not be fitted or rehearsed or corrected into place. And something behind Lady Marveth's eyes shifted, a tightening, a narrowing. And she said very calmly, very pleasantly, that Isolde would not be attending the festival. Isolde stood very still. She asked politely and carefully why. Lady Marveth replied that the house needed someone to stay behind, that the kitchen needed managing, that the animals would need attending in the morning, that someone responsible must remain, and since Rosalind and Cynthia had important business at the palace and Lord Caspian would be accompanying them, it fell naturally to Isolde to hold the household together. She said all of this pleasantly, in the voice she used when she wanted something to sound like common sense rather than what it was. Isolde looked at her stepmother for a long moment. Then she said, with a quietness that was not defeat but something steadier, that her father would surely want her to come as well, that she would speak with him before any decision was made. Lady Marveth's pleasant expression did not flicker. She said, equally pleasantly, that Lord Caspian had already agreed, that he had already been told that Isolde preferred to stay, that she was tired and had asked to be excused from the journey. She said it the way one reports a simple fact, as if the lie had already been true for so long that it was unkind to call it otherwise. Isolde opened her mouth. Lady Marvetha's hand came up, one finger raised, gentle and final. And she said, so softly that it was almost kind, that the festival was no place for a girl who had ideas above her situation, and that Isolde would do better to be grateful for the roof she lived under and the meals that were provided and the patience of a stepmother who had been far more generous than she was required to be. Then she took the key from the hook inside the hallway cabinet, walked to Isolde's bedroom door, and locked it from the outside. She did not explain. She simply walked away, back to the bustle of getting Rosalind and Cynthia into the carriage, back to the ribbons and the final adjustments and the practiced smiles. And Isolde stood in the locked room with her blue dress and her white flower hem and her one blue ribbon, and she listened to the carriage roll away down the gravel path and out through the gate, and then the sound of it faded, and there was nothing left but silence. She did not cry immediately. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the window. The small window that faced the back garden, too high to reach comfortably, too narrow to climb through. And she breathed steadily, the way her father had taught her to breathe during the years after her mother died, when sadness sat on the chest like a stone. In and out. Steady. One thing at a time. The room was not unkind, as rooms go. It had her books and her cat Fig, who immediately climbed into her lap and pressed his forehead against her chin in the way that cats have of offering comfort, without quite acknowledging that comfort is what they are offering. She had a candle and a small table and the window with the garden light coming through it, thin and patient. She thought about crying. She thought about shouting. She thought about trying to take the hinges off the door, which she had read could be done with the right tool and the right determination. She thought about all of these things. And then she thought about what her father used to say about patience, that it was not the same as doing nothing. That patience was doing everything quietly, on the inside, while you waited for the outside to catch up. So Isolde waited. And while she waited, she thought. She thought about Lady Marvetha's face when she looked at the pale blue dress. She thought about the way the woman had measured her from the doorway at their very first meeting, 2 years ago, with those eyes that smiled in the wrong direction. She thought about the small erosions. The bedroom moved, the chair at the table moved, the servants redirected one by one, and she understood, perhaps fully for the first time, that this was not a new decision. This was the completion of one that had been made long ago. Lady Marveth was afraid of her. Not of anything she had done. Isolde had never given anyone a reason to be afraid of her, but of what she was. Of the fact that she existed and could not be hidden entirely, and could not be made smaller than she naturally was. And that fear had grown, quietly, in the woman's chest all this time, until the announcement of the prince's festival gave it a direction, and a locked door gave it an action. Isolde pressed her face into Fig's warm fur and breathed slowly. Outside the window, the garden was in full early spring bloom. The old pear tree was flowering white. The rosemary hedge smelled clean and sharp in the morning air. And at the far edge of the garden, near the stone wall, there was a woman Isolde had never seen before. She was old in the way that certain things are old. Not broken down, but worn to their essential shape, the way river stones are worn by water until they are perfectly themselves. She wore gray and brown, the colors of bark and fieldstone. Her hair was white and loose, moving very slightly in a wind that did not seem to be blowing. She was sitting on the low garden wall with her hands folded in her lap, and she was looking directly at Isolde's window. Isolde pulled the window open as far as it would go and leaned out into the morning air. The old woman raised one hand in greeting, not a wave exactly, more of an acknowledgement, as if she had been expecting Isolde to appear at exactly that moment, and was confirming that yes, she was in the right place and the right time was now. She said her name was Marin. She said she was a friend of Isolde's mother. A childhood friend, from before the Lord's house and the title and all of it. Back when Isolde's mother was simply a girl who grew up near the forest edge, and knew which mushrooms were safe and which stars were which. She said she had promised, long ago, that she would keep an eye on the daughter her friend never got to finish raising. She said she was sorry she had not come sooner, and that she was here now, and that was what mattered. Then she reached into the basket beside her on the wall and held up one by one, 3 things. The first was a key, small and brass and unremarkable, except that it hummed very faintly in the morning light in a way that keys usually do not. The second was a dress, and this was not a dress you could explain easily. It was the color of the sky at the moment just before stars appear, a deep and luminous blue that seemed to hold light inside it rather than simply reflecting it. It was simple in line but exquisite in detail. Delicate silver thread worked along the bodice and hem in patterns of climbing vines and small open blossoms. It was the most beautiful dress Isolde had ever seen, and it was clearly, absolutely, exactly the right size for her. The third thing Maren held up was a single white flower. The same kind Isolde had stitched along the border of her own humble gown, which she tucked behind her own ear and smiled and said nothing about. Some things do not need to be explained. She told Isolde to use the key on the door. She told her to wear the dress and to go to the festival on foot by the forest path, which would take less than an hour in the morning air. She told her to be herself entirely. No performance, no pretending, no making herself smaller to make anyone else more comfortable. She said Prince Dorian was a young man who had grown up hearing very many people tell him what he wanted to hear, and that the one thing he was genuinely hungry for was someone who would simply, honestly, be real. She told her to come home before the great clock of the capital struck its last note of midnight, because after that the forest path would be too dark to walk safely, and because Maren's arrangements had a habit of unwinding at midnight the way enchantments had always had, even before anyone started writing them down in books. And then the old woman stood, picked up her basket, and walked along the garden wall until she reached the far gate, and stepped through it, and was simply gone. Not dramatically, not in a flash of light, but in the quiet way that people who have always belonged to old forests disappear when they choose to. Isolde stood at the window for a long moment. Then she reached her arm through the gap, and the brass key, the one Maren had left on the sill, was warm in her hand. The key turned in the lock as if the lock had been waiting for it, and the door swung open without a sound. Isolde stepped out of the room, changed quickly into the blue dress that Maren had left draped over the garden wall. She did not ask herself how it had arrived there, because some gifts are not improved by interrogating them, and she walked out of the quiet house and into the bright morning. The forest path was everything Maren had promised. It wound through old trees whose branches met overhead in a canopy of new green leaf, and the light came through in moving patches, and somewhere above and ahead of her a wood thrush sang in the way wood thrushes do when they have decided that the morning is too beautiful not to remark upon. Isolde walked steadily, the skirt of the luminous blue dress brushing through the short grass at the path's edge, Fig trotting beside her for the first half-mile before sitting down on a tree root, and washing his ear in the meaningful way that communicated he had walked quite enough, and she could manage the rest on her own. She arrived at the capital city just as the morning was fully open and golden, and she followed the white stone road up the hill toward the great palace of the House of Aldenmore, whose spires caught the sunlight and threw it back in long brilliant angles across the sky. Other young women were arriving from all directions, in carriages on horseback, in groups of friends holding hands and laughing nervously, and alone, like Isolde, walking with quiet self-possession up the long road.
Isolde.
At the palace gate, she gave her name to the steward, who wrote it in the great ledger alongside all the others. She walked through the arched entrance into the courtyard, which had been strewn with rose petals in honor of the rose moon, and she stopped for a moment and simply breathed it in. The music from the hall beyond, the smell of flowers and warm bread, and the particular electricity of a place where something important is beginning.